This is Radical Love Live, an ongoing series of podcasts and special events where we explore faith outside the boxes. Hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Kelly.
How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I am good. I'm good. Thank you. You seem like you're in a very good mood. Waiter, I'll have what he's out.
Yeah, I know. I am in a great mood, actually. Thank you very much. So if you ask me how I'm doing, I will tell you that I am freaking awesome.
How are you doing?
I am freaking awesome.
I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
I am. I shared on another episode that came back from a retreat that was something that my soul needed. And, so yeah, there may be a little bit of a spiritual high on that, but, just life is good. Yeah.
Oh, good. Good.
How are you, my friend?
I'm good. I'm good. I started today, I think, on the wrong side of the bed. I was up very late last night as a freelancer. My work hours are long.
Yep.
But it's one of those days where my friends have sort of brought me out of the funk that I was in, starting like this morning. I got to hang out with my wife and my kid and, talked with a couple people along the way, like, in the Uber on the way over. And then I've got to spend the day talking with you about some of the things that are most important. And it's kind of lifted my spirits. So.
I love hearing that.
Yep.
Then I'm really grateful and blessed to share some time with you.
So, likewise. So what are we up to today?
Well, we have a wonderful friend with us today, Dr. Ryan Joseph Allen. Hello there, Dr. Ryan Joseph Allen.
Welcome, Ryan.
Oh, hello. Thank you, gentlemen, for having me today. I'm excited to share some time with you and share some space with you and
Yes,
learn together and love together. That's what it's all about. So
indeed, Ryan.
I love that.
So there's a bit of history with Ryan. So quick introduction. Ryan is not only a dear friend, he is also on the board of directors for my foundation, Divine All Along, and as well as Kelly, who's also on the board. So there's a connection from that. But a little bit of history, I think that's worth sharing a quick bit. This is how how synchronicity works and how Ryan and I actually met.
Okay.
So I'm going to share this quickly with our listeners and with you, Kelly, because I'm not sure if you know the story.
I don't know if I do know the story.
Yeah. So, there's the my writing project, what I call the framework of my faith, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
that's on your website.
It is on my website. If anybody wants to go look at it, it's right there for your reading pleasure and inspiration to create your own framework of faith. Well, with that said, probably close to 3 years ago, I was looking for somebody to help me figure out what I had created, because it's not a book, but like what is this animal? It's like going to the veterinarian and say what species do I have here, because I don't know what it is.
Right.
So I'm rooting around for this book publisher, and I ran into to a person that Ryan happened to know, Jen Grace. And she's in Connecticut, a queer book publisher. And she doesn't publish just queer books, but I mean, that was a connection, right? And she's an entrepreneur. And so I got talking to Jen about what I had created, and I sent it to her, and her editors agreed. He's like, well, this is not really a book. But and I said, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this. Anyway, so I said, let me keep on my search. Well, in the meantime, though, she happened to mention one of her book clients, and that is Ryan. And so we're going to talk to him about his book. So she's like, yeah, I think you two should talk, because you're in similar spaces about spirituality, and I think there's a definite connection. So she put Ryan and I in touch, and boom, from that moment on, we've, we instantly became friends, and we have just shared our experiences now for quite some time here. And I'm really profoundly grateful for you, Ryan. It's your friendship and the love you give and the inspiration for your own work has been, it's really amazing. So
very cool. What a cool connection.
yeah, thank you. Thanks, Mark, for saying that. I think sometimes you meet people and they're soul friends, right? Or some people call soul family or whatever you want to call it. But it's definitely a deep soul connection from our first conversation, and where you just know this person is going to be in my life forever in one way, shape, form, or another. And, and it's almost like time doesn't exist, right? So I could go a month without talking to you or a day and it would feel similar. Or I don't know if you have friends like that in your life, but you know, you could go even a few months or a year without talking to it and you catch up and you're like on the same place. It's
Hmm.
like you never left. Because it's such a divine working of a relationship. And you know,
Yeah.
I always say those friendships are friendships you gotta hold on to forever.
Mhm.
You don't even have a choice maybe, but like, I'm so honored that I got to meet you, Mark, and we've been on a journey since. And you've been with me during some projects and transitions and
Yes.
life and all the things. So I really appreciate your friendship and your love.
Thank you, Ryan. It's so true. And I'm just grateful that, yeah, we get to share this with our listeners now too. So let's dig a little bit about, because you are one busy dude. So let's dig into some of your business. So maybe we go back to, I'm not going to ask you your origin story about your faith or anything else like that, but maybe you can tie that into the book. What was it? What happened that made that book happen? So
Mm.
we'll start there. I think our
What's
listeners
your
will want to hear
story?
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it starts at the origin, right? So it's so, you know, non-origin story, but also, so ever since I was really young, I was, you know, 3, 4, 5 years old. I just knew I was like so different than those around me. Like my brother was good at sports and I played sports too, you know, just naturally. My mom put me in sports and I was the kid that like sat in the field and the outfield and like picked flowers and like put them in my baseball glove or whatever. But regardless, I always just felt so different, right? My stepdad and my brother liked video games, and I wasn't really good at them, nor did I like them. And I wanted to do art projects and make things for people for gifts, and you know, use my hands, and there just weren't other men around me like, or at least I didn't see that when I was younger. Later to find out my grandpa was always a whittler and things like that. So I could have made that connection as a kid, but I didn't. I just thought, gosh, everyone feels so different than me. All the men around me, especially all my guy friends, you know, their interests and just their mannerisms and their, I don't know, just something about them seemed so different than me. And so I started kind of recognizing a separateness of from others.
Mm.
Hmm.
And you know, trigger warning here for suicide, but at the young age of 6, I had contemplated ending my own life
Oh my goodness.
for the first time, and it wouldn't be the last, and it wouldn't be the, you know, and luckily I didn't attempt at that age, but I had started thinking about it, what would it feel like, and all the thing. Anyway, and that's kind of dark and dismal, but it came from this separateness, I believe, after deep introspection and lots of work, kind of in the clinical field. Um, Recognizing like I just felt so different than, and I didn't feel understood and loved, even though I was deeply loved by those around me. I didn't feel it because I felt so different than. And so as I got
Mm.
older, of course, that morphed into other things, other self-destructive behaviors and other things like self-mutilation and drug and alcohol abuse. You know, and I was kind of one of those addicts, like y- just anything addict, you know, whatever was around. Um, and luckily I wasn't exposed to super, well, I shouldn't say hard drugs because I was from a young age. You know, I was doing pills and whatever.
Hmm.
But maybe not some of the harder things that we think about when we think about, you know, substances. And so as time went by, I went into middle school and high school and just kind of spiraled out of control. Um, by the time I went to college, you know, somehow I still got into college and went to college and did the thing and had a full time job. And finally, I found a relationship with my daughter's mother and thought, wow, you know, this doesn't seem too bad. And, you know, we love each other and we're like best friends. And a few months into the relationship, I came out to her and said, hey, I'm bisexual. Or at the time, I didn't know the term pansexual, but, you know, because I
Hmm.
had known this since I was younger, and which also, you know, created this masking, right? I had to mask my sexuality for a year. I mean, you know, for a long time, or felt like I had to at least. And so we got together and, you know, she said, okay, that's fine. You know, we'll stay together. And we stayed together for years and eventually had a kiddo. And, you know, I was using substances throughout this time. And when we found out my daughter was going to be here, I made this pact with myself. I said, okay, I'm not gonna use drugs, even marijuana or anything or whatever.
Mhm.
And so, of course, I threw it all away or gave it away or whatever, and I kept one, serving for myself. We'll call it a serving. Uh, and
Just
I
one, just
just
one.
one, and I hid it away, nor
I'm
no one
picturing
could
like
find it.
one joint behind, like
Yep,
in case of emergency break glass.
Yeah.
yep. And I knew that emergency would happen, of course. In the moment, it's like I felt strong, but I knew obviously why would I keep it. And so, for me at least, in my experience, it was never I couldn't just stop. I was self medicating
Of course.
from the masking for my queerness and that looked like at that time when my daughter's mother was pregnant. I was living in Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is in
Mhm.
Western Kentucky. I was going to WKU there. Um, and it's Kentucky, it's the South, and so it isn't everything you see in movies, and it is that at the same time, right? So there was that sense of definitely having to hide, who I was. I didn't know any openly gay people at that time, right? We're talking like 8, 9, 10, when that time period. And luckily things have evolved and changed. And I see so much more visibility for queer folks all over the state of Kentucky in beautiful ways. But at that time I felt really isolated. And so kept my queerness to myself. My
Mhm.
daughter gets here finally, right? And then what do? I go smoke that weed and steal my daughter's mother's pain pills that she was given because she had a C-section. She didn't need that. I waited a week or two to make sure she didn't need them for pain.
How considerate of you.
Right. I mean, what else? What else is the right thing to do? Like I take them right away. But it just showed like
Uh,
because I wasn't dealing with any of the root causes of my addiction or any of the root causes of my self-loathing, which was the what propelled my drug use and substance use. And so I wasn't dealing with any of that. I was just tucking it away, and it didn't help that my daughter's mother didn't really want me to tell anybody about it. And so it
oh
was
boy.
kind of a pact between us. Like, let's just keep this between us. It's kind of a secret. And um, it was just a really hard time. And most people would say, oh, your daughter's here. You're going to clean yourself up. And it was like the opposite. Like I was doing well. Why step for that, from the time we found out she was pregnant, about 6 months before she gave birth, we found out about month 3 because we weren't really planning and we just didn't know. Anyway, and so for that 6 months I was sober, and then it was like right after I was not sober anymore. Um,
Mhm.
and it just was like a click of the fingers. I don't know if it was the stress or, like I said, it was a multitude of things. But I started using using again, and you know, yeah, and it just spiraled downward. We moved back to the Cincinnati area, which is where we both kind of from, or at least had where we had met at and where our families lived currently. And I thought, well, maybe things will be okay there too. And they weren't. And um, she went out of town one weekend, and we'd gotten a big blow up fight a couple days before that. And I just made that decision in that fight. I said, I can't live like this. I said, two unhappy parents are going to make an unhappy child. And I don't know if I'm going to survive this. Like, I don't know if I can survive hiding who I am. I said, I have to just come out, and I have to leave this relationship because obviously it's not going to work. And
Mhm.
our unhappiness isn't going to make a happy child. And that's what it really, so it was such a challenging time, um, to decide that, right? Too, because it's like you have a newborn and, you want to be a good dad and a partner. And also at the same time, I was spiraling, with my substance use, but then spiraling like mentally, as far as my mental health, like I just knew I wasn't going to like I'm not going to make it if I stay like this.
Mhm.
Um, and then my daughter's going to be without a father anyway. So I said, well, I have to do this. And so she went out of town, and I had and this is a part of the story. It's in my book, but probably most people wouldn't share, but I, had my time. I decided I'm gonna meet a couple guys and see what it's like. And I said, regardless, I have to come out. But I said, I need to see what this is all about. I've been wanting this for so long, and I'm gonna leave her as soon as she gets back home. But I didn't. know, I should have done it before, had a transition plan and did all the things. But when you're, when you mask for so long and you hide who you are for so long and you decide to come out, sometimes it's like now or never feeling. For
Mhm.
me, at least, is what it felt like. And other people's stories I've heard are similar. It's like, and also now I talk to people about how you can do that in a more um, balanced way or whatever, and help guide people in that process. But for me, it
But
was,
balance wasn't the thing for you at that moment.
oh no, it was a
No.
spiral. There's never balance in a spiral. It was all chaotic.
Let's just go for it.
And so, that experience happened or experiences happened, I should say, and
Oh boy.
which we won't go into,
This is a family show, Ryan.
but what we will say is when she came home, I told her what happened. Or I told her that I was coming out and then I was leaving her. I didn't leave out, I left out some of the details, didn't want to hurt her, and
Right.
maybe some self-preservation there. A little, I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah.
I even knew what that was or felt like then because I was such a mess. But anyway, I, you know, and so we broke up and started dating men, and that was really rough transition. I dated the first guy, it was like I let him move in the first week we met, into where I was living, and so things were really rough. It was not a great relationship. I was cheated on and all the things. So,
Mhm.
but so then but I thought when I came out, I'm gonna have this really stable, amazing LGBTQ queer network of people, friends that are just gonna come out of the woodwork. They're gonna walk out of the hills or something, and find me. And that just wasn't the case. I mean, there were great organizations at the time. I just didn't know they existed. And there were great support systems. I didn't know they existed or I chose not to utilize them. And what happened? I got in with the wrong crowds, started doing more and more drugs. And soon I was, on opioids every day, for the next 6, 9 months. And just kind of in a definite, like, it was deeper than a spiral. I always say I spiraled to the into the earth. I dug myself a hole and then I went and started digging in the bedrock. Like I went beyond the normal digging and just dug myself into this place that I just felt like I could never get out of. And um, I was sitting there with my drug dealer one day, and who was happened to be my friend, and we started talking about God and faith and believing in God. And of course, we had never just talked about this, and later to find out she intentionally brought it up because I had, to give context for the situation, for this conversation, about a month prior to this conversation, I had decided that I was going to stop opioids and I stopped cold turkey. Um,
Oh.
and of course, in that moment, I got the message to stop. That's a whole story we can go into or not, but at the end of the day, I started using, drinking and smoking. I couldn't live without that. So I was doing that, but she had been there through this process of me kind of coming to her saying like, I'm going to stop everything. And she's like, well, maybe you will. She said, at least start with the hard stuff, with the stuff that's really making your life like not work for you.
Mhm.
And
And
just and again, just to repeat, this is your drug dealer telling you this.
yes, yeah.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. When your drug dealer is counseling you in harm reduction, just like you're probably in a bad spot. I'm just
I mean,
not to make light of
not
it.
make
Just,
light of it, but holy
yeah.
smokes, context, folks. Got it. Like, this is my drug dealer telling me you should be thinking about things.
Well, and that's the thing too, is we sat in her, you know, um, rundown hotel room, smoking a blunt, and as she was telling me this too. So it's like
It's
and
not.
but that was the thing. She knew that I needed that something wasn't going well with me. And then so this conversation happened about a month after that. I was staying sober from opioids, and still definitely spiraling though. Most people would say, well, maybe you stop spiraling. And it was like, nope, the self-destruction was still there. The self-loathing was still there.
Yeah.
And she could sense that. And she later, had a conversation with her, and she told me, I purposely had this conversation with you about God, like intentionally, because I came into your house that day and I could tell you were probably on the cusp of using again, or maybe deciding not to live anymore. She's like, you just feel it. She was a very empathic person, and we had many deep conversations. And she spent a lot of time together. It wasn't just like she had dropped off the drugs and left, she hung out with me a lot. So she was a friend as well.
Mhm.
And so we sat there in my kitchen at the time, and she started talking about God, and, like, I had no idea she was going to do that. And I started sharing about my experience. I said, well, I believed in God when I was little. I said, when I was young, and I could feel God. I said, I felt it. It wasn't just like I went to these churches and did all different kinds of churches, right? From all in the kind of different sects of Christianity all over the place.
Mhm.
And it's like, I didn't really feel God a lot of times in like the sermon or the pastor, priest, or, minister sharing, but I did feel God when people would sing collectively in these groups. And so I knew that God was real. I could feel it. It was something different in my heart. I knew, um, now I have tons of words for God, divine, creator, source, oneness, spirit. But as a kid, I knew it was God.
Mhm.
So as I got older and started realizing my LGBTQ plus identity and things like that, oh, I just fell away because I'd heard all these things. Gays go to hell and LGBTQ people are sinners and all the things that all queer people have probably heard, unless you've just been so privileged to not be around that directly. But, it was directly and indirectly, and no one knew I was gay, and it wasn't coming from my immediate family, and it wasn't directed towards me, but it was like a constant bombardment of, comments from family or whatever. And, um, extended family, especially, and, churches and society and people at school. And so I just turned away from God and turned more into myself, but not in a good way. I turned more into my self-loathing. I just hated every aspect of myself, the way I walked, the way I talked, the things I thought about, my actions, my lack of actions, my A, B, C, D, E, F to X. I hated, Z. I hated myself, every piece. And in that moment, when she asked me about what I thought about God, I started feeling something in my heart space, my chest, and this area. And right about that time, she said, to me, God loves and accepts all people just the way we are. And it was weird. It's a great thing people might have said at other times in my life. I just didn't listen, or maybe I just hadn't heard that ever. I don't know. But in that moment, it was like this black tar broke away from my heart. It was like a black hard. It was hard. I almost feel it. It sounds crazy. It sounds weird, but it's not to me. And it like broke out of my heart, broke off of my heart, and I could finally feel my heart again. And then I could feel God again. And I was like, whoa, like, I'm high right now, but I'm high every day. So this isn't like, this isn't like some type of high experience or whatever. Like, I'm high all the time. So, and I just knew. And so we had deeper conversation around that. And she just said, my God doesn't think anything about your queerness or your being gay. Like, that doesn't even register. And I thought, I've never even heard something like this. Like, I didn't even know it was possible. I thought that the only solution was that God hated me.
Wow.
And so then I hated myself. And she left and went on her way for that evening. And I went to the bathroom, and I remember I just fell to my knees um, and just asked God to like save my life. And, I had been baptized time and time again, 2 or 3 more times. I don't know, growing up. And, this was something different. This felt like the ultimate baptism, but it wasn't like that. It wasn't rooted in biblical text, or wasn't rooted in, that, but it was like this deep, deep connection with God. And still Jesus, I've had this instant like rebirth of my love and connection with Jesus, but it wasn't necessarily in like the Christian context that modern day, Christianity might think, but it was this really profound experience. And I said, you have to help me save myself. I said, I need to save me. And I don't know anyone else that can except you and me. And we have to do it. And so, you would think the next day I would stop the drugs and drinking. Of course I didn't. So that went a few more months. And I eventually had this moment, again, this moment where God came and spoke to me, or spoke through me, or was with me. and it was the different friend processing life. And I just almost nearly got evicted from my apartment, and my house was almost about, or my car was about to get repoed, and I was working a minimum wage job. Of course, it was at a fair trade store, so that's really cool. Helping the world in some way, and I think that's where my love for helping others began. Though, as I worked at this store, and I got to share stories of the fair trade practices and just the really cool kind of like spiritual people that came in and shared stories and experiences. And in that moment, I decided, I was like, I have to stop the drinking and the drugging and all the things. I said, for me to live my mission, which God gave to me in that moment, maybe because he knew I wasn't going to stop if I didn't have something else to kind of like grasp onto a purpose. Um, and so he gave me my mission, which he said it still help people love and accept themselves. So actually, in the moment, it was help people love and accept themselves. But of course, the caveat to that is you have to love and accept yourself, right? You can only teach people to the degree that you've been taught, at least in my experience. So I was like, okay, sounds like a fun job, to do a fun purpose. And at the same time, gosh, I had lots of freaking work to do, right? And so, and that's where I'll leave you to ask questions or intervene or whatever. But this was about 12 years ago when this experience happened, almost to date, maybe about a month from now. So 11 years and 11 months ago, um, this experience happened, and wow, it was powerful and also kind of scary, right? Because it's like, well, what do I do now? I'm working at this fair trade store. The last year I hadn't been attending college regularly. I was enrolled, but I like walked out of every class, maybe minus one. Somehow, I don't even know how that happened. It was an internship, and I guess I shouldn't have been up where they passed me. But anyway, I was just my whole life, I had to move back in with my mom into her unfinished basement at that. Luckily, it had some like old carpet thrown down. But I'm like this at the time. I didn't feel old, but I was like 23 or whatever, living in my mom's basement, about to get kicked out of college, working a minimum wage job, like helping people. So thank God, right? I felt like I was doing something that was beneficial to the world. And how am I supposed to help people love and accept themselves? Like, how am I supposed to do that? Like, okay, you gave me my mission, my purpose, but how do I live that purpose out? And that's kind of where I'll leave all for you all to kind of jump in. But what a weird place to be at, right?
In a word, yes. I know a little bit of your story, but you had not actually told me about that experience that you had in the bathroom. It's very similar to mine where, you know, um, I asked God for help. I had no choice. And I did it as an angry atheist. But, it was a very matter of fact, quite honestly, non-emotional experience for me. It was just like, it's like, okay, otherwise my life is going to come to an end. Not maybe that day, but I knew self-destruction was on my path at that point. So it was very clear. So, yes, definite question. So here you are, you, at what point so what was it that actually got you to stop, like go and get your sobriety going? What was that?
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a great question. I think I kind of glazed over that part just because I don't want to talk for an hour.
No.
Our whole thing would be me just talking. So this happened about a month before I had that conversation with my drug dealer about
Okay.
God. I was sitting in my car, and just trigger warning for anybody. I mean, obviously drugs are going to be talked about, but I had snorted my last line of Opana, which is a really strong painkiller, very strong opioid. And so maybe I was a little high then, but but normally, I was used to just being high. But I had this experience. This song came on the radio, Evanescence song of all things. And it was called Lost in Paradise. And, I'm not going to sing it or try to rehash the lyrics, but essentially I saw my daughter as this Evanescence girl, which I don't even know her name. I should know her name. But I know what she looked like. And so I saw my daughter grown up looking similar to her. And also just this, if you listen to that song, there's this deep sadness in a lot of their music, but it's real and raw. But there was this moment where I saw my daughter singing me this song, and then she kind of like stepped back from the song and said, like, "Dad, if you would have shown up for me, if you would have like," and I'm paraphrasing now, but it was a little longer of a monologue, but essentially, if you could break your ancestral and familial lineage lines of like men showing up for their kids and getting sober or whatever, not dying because you're going to leave me. Like you're going to end up dead or in prison or something. You're going to end up not being in my life. You're going to be dead to me, regardless if you're actually dead. Like you're going to be dead to
Wow.
me. And I wept. I sat in my car and wept. And I said, yeah, like, I can't keep doing this. And so I had this moment where just I knew I couldn't, I came out, in a weird way, I had to come out for my daughter. And I said, I can't stop there, right? I can't stop at that point. I made that decision to come out because needed her to be happy and she wasn't going to be happy if I was unhappy. Or at least growing up, I think kids, they're resilient to an extent. And so who knows, she might've been the happiest claim in the world. But I think, from the psychology I've seen and studies I've seen, it would be much more difficult. Right. And so, I just had this moment. I was like, I have to. So that's the cold turkey. I mean, that was
Wow.
cold turkey. I didn't, check in any programs. I didn't have counseling. I didn't have therapy. I wish I would have done all those things. I wish I would have sought help. But who did I go through to help? It was my drug dealer. That was where I sat the next day and I told her the experience and I said, I have to stop this. I have to stop this. And she said, well, I'll support you in that. Like, definitely won't be getting anything from me, which she didn't really sell. She, just to back up, she didn't really sell opioids of that strength, but she would sell me like little things along the way, like lower strength things, but I couldn't find anything to kind of make sure I was doing okay,
Wow.
Because once you're on opioid every day, that's the thing about opioids. We could go on about this forever, but in my experience and lots of other folks that I've seen, it's just so, it's just grips at you so much. And it's like, feels like you can't live without it. Like,
Wow.
I'd been addicted my whole life to, marijuana and alcohol, but this was a different type of addiction. It was mental and physical, right? I think maybe the physical piece wasn't there with the other ones for me as much, but with this, it was. So I had her full support, which was great, for that piece. But of course, like I said, what were we doing? We were rolling up a blunt, about to smoke. And so I think that was kind of, and she started then calling herself my pharmacist, which was interesting.
Hmm.
Because she hadn't used that term prior to, she just started using that term. And, I was like self-medicating through all these experiences and also still spiraling in my addiction. Right. And also maybe trying to, you know, get weaned off these opioids, which were really powerful. And obviously I always tell people, please don't pick my route. Please get help. Like go to a therapist, go to a center, go to a trusted family member who has connections to resources or friend or, your health department or, at minimal, go to your health department and say, hey, I need some help.
Yeah.
And I shouldn't speak for all health departments, but I think even the ones here in rural Kentucky are usually really great to work with and really great resources, or at least a start of that resource. So, but I didn't even know those things at the time. I didn't look it up. I didn't really know anyone else who was like around me getting sober. I don't think I knew one person that was sober around me.
Yeah.
And so, I knew AA and AA existed, but, I was actively, drinking and smoking. So I didn't feel like I fit in there either. I don't know. I just didn't feel like I had a place. And so I was with my drug dealer who was acting as kind of like, as help
So
along
like
the way.
your local methadone clinic where you've got your own
Yeah.
personal titration program.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a really interesting experience. And also, I advocate that you really have your own experience, but please reach out to folks. There's so many people, especially now, for all drugs and alcohol and substance use disorder. I mean, such a broad array of people. I mean, there's, queer-based recovery organizations. There's, BIPOC, recovery I mean, there's all kinds of different recovery groups and organizations out there doing such amazing work. And so I think now that there's more visibility to that, maybe my story would be different if that was these days. But, this being over a decade ago, there just wasn't as much, or it wasn't in my line of sight. And so that's probably one of my biggest pieces of advice for folks. Like, and I'm not here to preach what you could, should, would do, but, it's really vital to have people around you supporting your sobriety, and, professionals too. Don't take my route, but my route ended up okay for me, but it might
Yeah.
not be okay for 100 of the other. If it was not 100 people in a room, and then the other 99 might not have been okay, but for some reason
Right.
it was.
But it worked
Uh,
for you.
and I do think that's a testament that recovery looks different for everyone.
Oh my God, does it ever?
Mhm.
Nobody has the same journey on recovery. Speaking with experience on that too, mine 12 years will be coming up in September, God willing. So, yeah, it's no two stories are ever going to be the same. So can we fast forward a little bit, because there is, of course, the book is still available. Let's not totally negate that, right? People can find it on Amazon, which it's a good read. I would definitely would
Mhm.
recommend it.
Mhm.
But let's talk a little bit, because you just finished your PhD, and I think it's important to really kind of paint the picture of how far you've come in your recovery. And now, you mentioned it, where's the purpose in all of this? And so let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Now that you're just finished with your PhD,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank
congratulations.
you. It was a long road for that.
Yeah.
And it just started simply by getting back in school, and I had to go to my advisor and the, financial aid department and say, "Hey, look, I'm getting sober, and, this is what's going on for me. I need help to get back in school. I want to make sure that, A, B, and C." And I just had conversations with people. I didn't share very publicly about my sobriety at first at all.
Mm.
But I did in that situation because I knew it might be a catalyst for them to say, "Okay, yeah, we want to help this person." And that makes sense to why they flunked out of their whole last year. And
Mhm.
that's where it
Did you
started.
go back to the same school?
I did go back to the same school.
Oh, wow. That's brave.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Well, and I ended up double majoring, in geography and broadcast journalism. Though initially I was working on a meteorology degree as well. So I had to kind of let that go. Well, and for multiple reasons. One, Cincinnati at the time did not have a meteorology program in this region. Ohio State had one, Louisville had one. But anyway, so that was part of it, and part of it was probably just I would have probably had to be in school for a lot longer because the prereqs and things like that weren't matching up from transfers of schools and, just A, B, and C. So, I had to kind of just make a decision to say, well, one major is good enough, but, I'll have this geography major instead of that meteorology, which I know most people would say, oh, how are those the same thing? But a lot of courses ended up translating to geography courses at this school. So, um, and don't ask me where things are out on the map, because I don't know if I'll be able to tell you.
But you know what's happening in the sky above them, right?
Yeah, well, to some degree, and a lot of cultural geography stuff too. So, I did enjoy that, like cultural anthropology and things like that. So, but anyway, so I went back to school. I finished up. Um, I had a really great internship at this place called Grailville, which did organic farming and retreats, and
Mm.
spiritual events. And so that kind of helped in my spiritual journey. I came across a couple other, organizations and things. The School of Metaphysics, which is based in Wendyville, Missouri, and has locations all over the Midwest, region, and also, other parts of the country too. And then I came across another movement called the Oneness Movement, which is like a meditation and healing modality movement. So I got connected with all of these different things, right? This internship, which was based in the spiritual kind of aspects of life. These other two, one's a school and one's more of like a group, but
Mhm.
got involved in that. And that really helped in my sobriety because at this point I still wasn't in any type of formal program. I utilized kind of spiritual programming as my program. But I was very active in it, right? Like at some points I was in different group. Well, internship's not a group, but it was like a spiritual oasis, right? Like I was getting to do spiritual programming and sit in on spiritual retreats and, uh, do some organic farming and work at the farmer's market and make friends with the other booth vendors who were, really cool people too. And, so I finished up school, graduated with that, probably thought I would never go back to school. I was working as a server at the time, at Red Lobster of all places, the good Cheddar Bay biscuits. And
Yeah.
I was in prayer and meditation. I meditate. So I started meditation practice. I meditate every single day, 2 to 4 times, typically. Every once in a while, I might get only one, or sometimes I might meditate more than that, which is a unusual day. But um, I started practice then, which was really vital for me. And I was in meditation and I kept getting go back to school. And I was like, okay, let's do early childhood development. Let's be a teacher. I've always wanted to teach. Or, oh, what about clinical psychology? Or what about um, business? And I was like, business? No, oh, that sounds awful. That sounds like horrific. And it was just weird. Every time in meditation, when I would meditate or pray about it, it was always MBA. And I was like, why? Why an MBA? Like, that sounds horrible. Like, I would literally say that to God. I'm like, that sounds effing horrific. Like, why would you let me do that? Because I wanted to work with people, right? Like, I was like, my end goal was to work in some professional sense with people and help people, right? Because my purpose was to help people love and accept themselves. I said, so I can do that in school, teaching, I can do that in, clinical psychology with clients or patients, whenever. And so but I followed. I said, okay, God, I'll take my GMAT and get all this stuff. And I got into an MBA program and, I just listened. I said, okay, I kind of blindly followed, right? I think most people, we went around the room, for a couple semesters and, the professors would always say, why are you here? What are you doing? Most people were like, oh, I want to raise up my job, or I want a promotion, or I want more scalability and potential, corporate worlds. And me and one other friend were the only people that were like, we were called to be here. And so we did it. And, I mean, we can give you other reasons, like maybe we'll be entrepreneurs, or maybe we'll be this or this, or, we've worked in these fields. But at that time, I was like, I've worked in the serving field, and that is a field. But I didn't have it as a career. I have so many friends who are career waiters, and they make wonderful lives and they love their jobs, but I was just doing it more out of necessity.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really have a passion for serving at all. I had a passion for connection with people. So I'm in this MBA program. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, this makes no sense for my life. What is up with this? And I had a friend like that too. She was funny. Um, but in our program, she ended up being an entrepreneur. And so that was cool. And at the same time that she started her business, I, and with a partner and a friend, started a nonprofit called Love Must Win. And Love Must Win's
Right.
purpose was to help people love and accept themselves. So I said, oh my
Right.
goodness.
Right. Right.
And in hindsight, I realized maybe we never would have started a nonprofit if I wasn't in these courses and things like that. The other two folks were, had high school or sub college and things like that. And I don't think it was on their radar when we were first kind of brainstorming about this project we were working on. We're like, how can we help people? We all struggled with different things. And, I had substance use disorder and my sexuality, suicide survivor. Other two were actually both suicide survivors as well, or at least been closely linked to suicide and around family and friends and all kinds of other things, like domestic and sexual violence. All of us were survivors of something. And we said, how can we help other survivors? And so that's how it was birthed. And
Wow.
it was really organic. We didn't really have like a business plan or whatever. We had a mission. The mission was to help people love and accept themselves, though it was written out to be a little bit more elegant, but that was the gist of it. How do we lead with kindness and love and
Yeah.
acceptance for all people? And at the same time, to learn that for ourselves, right? As
Yeah.
leaders of this nonprofit. And eventually finished up with my MBA and still kind of didn't know. I was still serving professionally. That's what I was doing as a job. Like I said, I wasn't really like a career server. Um, and still it's like trying to figure out like, how do I do my nonprofit? Like, how do I help people and make money? And how do I, serve the community in the ways that I want to serve it? And so eventually, once again, in meditation, I got, go get your doctoral degree. And I said, oh no, I hate school. I said, I hate school. I was counting
No,
down
no
minutes
more.
for my MBA, like literally minutes. I'm like, I don't like school. Why would I go back to school again? I'm like, no. I literally was like, no. And then I was like, just look, just check it out. And so I found this program at Xavier University here in Cincinnati,
Yeah.
and it was leadership studies. And at the time, I thought, oh, I'm gonna get in this program. And I'm gonna study about leadership of nonprofit, leadership of, well, really that's what I was really interested in, leadership within the nonprofit and queer sectors. And got into this program, and it was fine. I learned a lot. And by the end of it, though, I realized, he said, when it was about time to get ready for my dissertation, I just said, leadership theory, great and all, important, very important work. It's not what I'm called to really focus on. And as I started talking to my advisor, who was also the program director, and I said, what else can we do? Like, let's do something with the LGBTQ community and like religious trauma. Because I started talking about my religious trauma more.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
I
And
see
he
where I
said,
see where this is.
and she
Yeah.
and she said, yeah, you can do that. And I said, well, wasn't this leadership studies program? And she said, yeah, but you can do post-traumatic growth. You can do all kinds of things. And I said, post-traumatic growth, what's that? And I started doing some research and realized that I had been in post-traumatic growth for years, but I didn't know what it was.
Lived experience. Yes.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I found that really fascinating. And I said, I wonder what other people have religious and spiritual trauma that have now kind of, it's never like you get on the other side of it, but you kind of like have navigated it and you learned from it and you grew from it. And now you're doing something to help other people or yourself or the world in some way. Because that's how I define post-traumatic growth. It's like, it could be defined lots of ways, but in the most layman's terms, it's like, it's past resiliency. I bounced back to resiliency, kind of like this middle ground from my trauma. And now I take it to the next step, which is like doing something with that trauma to, and it could be for yourself. It could be helping yourself. It doesn't have to be like helping the world through a nonprofit or, whatever. But for me, I realized that. And so I started thinking like, I wonder how many other people, and I proposed this to her, and she said, this is a great like area of research. And, I did all the research. I did a qualitative and a quantitative aspect. So I did some surveys, a lot of surveys actually, and then worked on interviews, and the surveys came back and the data was like, yeah, we all have trauma and we all have religious trauma, and queer people navigate their trauma similarly in some ways, but at least the ways I was measuring to allied folks. So I had kind of a two-pronged system. We had done our research with allies and with queer community.
Yep.
And like I said, the cross sections were just, I mean, it was nothing like prophetic. Definitely the trans community we were able to aggregate the trans community out because we had enough data points, and they had some more significant differences, more extreme traumas than LGBTQ folks, but and allies. But it appeared that allies and LGBTQ folks had not the same traumas, but they at least identified having like the same level of that trauma, like extreme levels of trauma from that. And so, without getting too much in the weeds, that was interesting. But what was really interesting was the qualitative research, where we interviewed allied folks and queer folks and got to hear their stories. I don't know how many times I cried with people, not necessarily during the interview, but maybe the interview was after. I could be unprofessional-ish, and I was like, oh my gosh, like how heart-wrenching and devastating, and also how heroic of you to be a survivor of this. And oh my gosh, and the story from gay and lesbians and trans folks that were, this pray the gay away.
Pray the gay away.
One of the biggest things that popped up. It was, and it was heart-wrenching. And the allies brought that up too. The allies said this was one of the rhetorics that I hated, but of course, not typically directly impacted by that. Though maybe they had a gay son or whatever, this or that. But listening to the queer folks say, pray the gay away. Oh, it was just, and the inability to ask questions or to, and then the disinformation, or not necessarily disinformation, but the different information streams, like the convoluted nature of things for people, like where they'd hear something or say something, or the Bible said something, and then their church said something else, or like that kind of confusion was one of the biggest other points of trauma for people. There were so many. We then, went through that data, looked at what the traumas were, but then we looked at what the pivot point was, kind of what to not get too spiritual, what the awakening moment was for these folks.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I had mine, multiple ones, but my biggest one, right after I stopped, right when I stopped using substances, but everyone else's. And so we marked what that occasion was. And sometimes it was more vague than others, but we could usually identify it in these certain areas, like some type of epiphany, some type of moment of clarity, some type of communication with someone, connection, a little bit more vague. We just wanted to kind of like get that pivot, what happened. And then the biggest piece kind of on the other side was, what did post-traumatic growth look like for these folks? A lot of times it looked like educating themselves and others. It looked like helping, like assisting with nonprofits or other work, or working with other folks with trauma. A lot of times it looked like, um, mysticism in some ways. And I would define mysticism as kind of like seeking your own truth. And so these people would seek their truth either, via other people or, materials, books and things like that. And yeah, and the beautiful outcomes of that were like all about communication, storytelling, connection with others and themselves, and some type of higher, not even higher power, but I defined it as love, some type of love, because that could be God, creator, source, oneness, mother nature, Gaia. That could be your own heart. That could be the hearts of others, the connection between your heart and their heart, and that kind of relationship. So like, it didn't have to look like higher power, like what we hear a lot of times in recovery organizations and things, but it had to look
Mhm.
like something, um, different than the way people identified relationship with self. Like it was like this higher relationship to self, or to something else, right? And so we identified that and kind of looked at that, and that was really, really cool, because what you could see is that there were lots of patterns. The people that had this post-traumatic growth were oftentimes sharing their story, right? They were often, connecting with other folks deeply, that were going through other similar experiences. Um, they were mystics in some ways,
Mm.
lots of them, either self-identified or, identified in kind of my definition of a mystic, like
Mhm.
seekers. And so the research was really fun. Um, you know, at some point, I decided, do I want to stay in academia or do I not want to? And so I decided, I'm just so tired. I'm tired of reading and writing, because before my dissertation came out, I wrote a book right around the time that I was writing a dissertation. And so I was like, I'm kind of tired of this formalized reading and writing. So I haven't published journals, but you can still find it online. Or if you need a copy of it or want to see it, please let me know. And I can send you a copy of it. And like I said, you can skip the quantitative stuff. And I mean, it's interesting, but it's, and one of fellow academic was like, oh, that's just, hogwash. What we really care about are these stories. That's
Yeah,
where
the stories. Yeah.
the real medicine comes in, and medicine being like the nuggets of love, or the nuggets of understanding or truth, or whatever. So I like to call that medicine. Like, what medicine did I get from a situation or a story
Yep.
or whatever? So the
So
medicine in
Oh,
the dissertation is that. So it was great work. Maybe one day I'll publish, maybe one day I won't. My
sounds
advisor
fascinating.
might
yeah.
publish, but yeah, I'm not, I decided that the world of academia was just not, actually briefly went back to school, to get a master's in theology after this. And I said, well, I'll stay in the program. Maybe I'll go back. But in this moment, this year of my life, or next year,
Yeah.
maybe even, like, I just don't have the capacity to be in formalized academia, and it has its own windfalls and downfalls. But yeah, it was a great experience. I I would say really, if you're thinking about continuing your education, just think about what that means for you. Like what are your motives? And at the end of the day, if my motive was to write this dissertation to help someone else, then it was all worth it. But if it was like to get a certain job or career, I mean, sure, if you're on that career path, you're in the corporate kind of world or even nonprofit world and you're trying to work yourself up. But I think to me, I always just like, what are your motives behind things? Like, does it align with your purpose? Is your purpose to keep evolving and growing and changing and learning? And then of course, then any type of education, formal or otherwise, is powerful. But if not, just evaluate, because it's a lot of work and it's a lot of stress and it's a lot of um, your familial relationships, even kind of dynamics change, and people have to kind of help more. Like my partner helped so much more during that time with our kiddo and things like that, and would bring me my dinners into the study as I was working 16-hour days to get my real world work done and my schoolwork and my dissertation and stuff. So just be aware of that. Definitely encourage you if you feel called, and also say, think about it. Don't just dive in. I was pretty blindly dove in. Once again, like I said, when I get a message, I just do it, which I never regret, but it's a different way to do things.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like you do anything gradually.
No.
No, he doesn't.
Even that program, I found it a week and a half before, about 10 days before the cutoff date for applications. I was able to get my application in and submitted all the things for the doctoral degree within that 10-day period. So, it was like it's just like, it comes to me and I do it. And also I don't always recommend that for others, depending on your personality or whatever.
Right.
Oh my God, Ryan. Well, I thank you for sharing more of your story. I knew our listeners would love to hear, there's so much to celebrate in your story, like the overcoming and, but the just coming into your own self, and you said it at the top of this, how like a soul friendship can materialize in very unexpected ways, like what we have, and also this work that you did on your dissertation just so happens to fit so well with what we do at Divine all along as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, who knew that this would come to be, just another reason why to have a friendship like this. And, but I think I will leave it this as we wrap up though. You are another example of what happens when we come into our own wholeness and we celebrate ourselves as we are created to be. And it is this flourishing that will take place, that once we realize that we are not others, that we're not less than, that we're not different from, it's all of those things. When we come to realize and how much we love ourselves, there's no stopping us at that point. Right. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Ryan.
And for anybody who listened to last week's episode where we were talking about mysticism,
yes,
this is definitely a great kind of next chapter to that, because this is those principles in somebody's practical real life and having an impact in the world. So Ryan, I don't even think you knew that you were doing that you were illustrating the points we made last week. So anyway, Thank you. Yeah. And I learned a lot from this, just about my friend and colleague.
Yeah. So, Ryan, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah. Thank you so much, gents. I really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, just go forward with love. I mean, that's what this is all about, right? Radical love. And that love doesn't always look like just loving others and loving the planet. The love also looks like turning that inward to yourself. I know that for me is the times I miss the mark. Like, I'm loving everyone else so beautifully, but then I'm missing that love for myself. And so I have to do things like self-care or other things. And that's a whole nother topic. But I do think I just wanted to throw that reminder to you, that love really does begin with you. And some people would say that feels selfish, or that feels like I don't have time to do that. It's like, I promise it makes such huge impacts in other parts of your life when you devote some time and love to you. It really does make ripples. So continue working on that. I will continue working on that. It's a lifelong journey. There's no destination. It's an infinity sign, and it's beautiful wherever you're at on that infinity sign. So thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time we got to spend together. So.
Thank you, Ryan.
Awesome. Thank you.
Kelly, thank you very much as always.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, folks, we'll catch you on another episode of Radical Love Live.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Radical Love Live, co-hosted by Mark Dilcom and Kelly Wilson. All rights reserved. You can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple, Stitcher, and other popular podcast platforms. Go to radicallovelive.com to learn more about us, watch recordings of our live events, and listen to our podcast. We also invite you to check out what Kelly and Mark are doing by going to our websites. Find Kelly at kellywilson.com and Mark at markdilcom.com. This is Radical Love Live, where we explore faith outside the boxes.